Hello, my name is Don Bragg. I'm a project leader and research forester with the USDA Forest Service Southern Research Station in Monticello, Arkansas. I wish I could be there in person to present this material, but today I'd like to speak on a topic that I find quite interesting, and it's forestry outreach in segregated Arkansas. My talk at last year's AHA meeting broadly covered forestry extension, which entails the translation, distribution, and, hopefully, application of scientifically acquired information for the betterment of the lives of average citizens. In the United States, extension was first used for agricultural production, row crops or livestock, and by the 1920s was formally expanded to include forestry. Because of its promise to improve the economic circumstances of the people who are the targets of extension work, governments had powerful incentive to ensure extension's wide distribution. There were also other non-cash benefits for good forestry practices, from soil conservation to wildlife protection to recreational amenities and future wood supply. Again, all the more justification to ensure as many Arkansas landowners received the benefits from forestry extension programs, which inherently must include African Americans, who made up an appreciable fraction of Arkansas landowners, especially in some of the southern and eastern counties in the state. Even those who did not own land could benefit from forestry extension instruction if it helped them better use forested properties or perhaps work in a forest-related occupation, such as logging. These were important considerations for the white-owned companies and plantations in Arkansas, who feared losing cheap workers to better opportunities elsewhere. Forestry extension was more challenging in the segregated South, however. Mixing and socializing of the races was kept to a minimum, so while early extension-related events such as these 1930s forest festivals were not advertised as being segregated, it would be safe to assume that only white citizens would have been welcome to participate in the various events. The same would have likely been true for other forestry extension events, such as moving picture shows. Starting after World War II, some University of Arkansas ag extension programs, which included forestry, made a more specific effort to reach out to African American residents by offering a Negro Study Day to accompany the programs given to the white communities. However, Negro Study Days were not offered at every one of the university's agricultural branch stations, and those offered were not the same format as those given to the whites. For instance, note how these ads both clearly indicate that white adults and youth got separate study days, while the Negro Study Day had adults and youths combined. Most of these annual study or visiting days, regardless of race, had various agricultural emphases, from row crops to animals to forestry, as well as soil and water conservation content. Eventually, field or visiting days would be offered with a purely forestry focus at these branch experiment stations or nearby privately owned properties in the same segregated format. It is not possible to determine from these newspaper clippings if the technical nature of the content differed for white and black attendees, but it may have, as the ancillary parts of the programs often differed. For example, a number of Negro Study Days had a religious and/or community theme, sometimes with local youth or women's groups providing some form of entertainment. Not all forestry extension was offered by government agencies or universities, as the timber industry also recognized the value of getting the general population interested in forestry. Here is a picture of Alvin Hallgren, who was working for the Crossett Lumber Company at this time, the early 1950s. Hallgren, a St. Paul, Minnesota native, worked for the Crossett Lumber Company from 1950 to 1959 as a forester and superintendent of wood procurement. As a part of his job, he worked on a project to encourage private landowners to replant old fields into pine, and was also involved in various youth education efforts. Al was an avid photographer and took many pictures of his work with the Crossett Lumber Company over the years. The following photos reflect some of the youth forestry extension efforts by the Crossett Lumber Company. And as an interesting aside, Al Hallgren sometimes used his children in the many photographs of his work with the planting program of the Crossett Lumber Company, including the one on the left of his son Stephen as a toddler. I would know Stephen Hallgren many years later as a professor of forest ecology at Oklahoma State University. White youth from 4-H and FFA clubs across the state competed to come to Arkansas Forestry Camp at places like Camp Couchdale or Petit Jean State Park. These camps were more recreational. Any of these youth could go on to Arkansas A&M or any other forestry school in the country and get a forestry degree, something not available to these youth who could not even try to attend the Arkansas-based forestry school until 1964, when Arkansas A&M finally integrated. African American youth who went to these segregated camps in the 1950s came from the Nevada County Training School, which is an Oak Grove School in Roston, Arkansas, and elsewhere for vocational training. Timber-related jobs for African Americans in Arkansas during this period were manual labor. No opportunities for careers as trained foresters existed. The latest date I found an announcement for University of Arkansas Southwest Branch Experiment Station with a separate Negro visiting day was in 1963. The next advertised forestry study day I found is from late 1964, and no mention of a segregated program is given. After all, in Title III of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited states and local governments from denying access to public facilities and programs based on race. It seems unlikely we will ever know the true impact of officially segregated forestry extension activities in Arkansas prior to 1964, and perhaps unofficial segregation after the Civil Rights Act. But we struggle to this very day to reach the African American forest landowner community, and participation rates of all landowners does not reflect the needs of the industry, the profession, or landowners themselves. So that's the end of my program. If you have any questions, please email them to me at the address you see on the right, don.c.bragg@usda.gov, and I'll try to address them. Thank you for your attention.